Hello and welcome back to the channel everyone. My name is Sam. In today's video I want to talk about the topic of free will. This is obviously a fascinating subject. It pretty much goes to the heart of what matters to us as human beings. It is therefore quite understandable that many scientists and philosophers have spent a lot of time investigating this subject. And in this video I want to guide you to a short investigation that can actually conclusively answer whether free will is something that exists or is just an illusion. And you will see that this question is not as hard to answer as you might assume. As a matter of fact, you have all the tools to come to a definitive answer. So let me state first of all that there is a more relative definition of free will. In that sense, free will obviously exists. So what do I mean by that? Of course, this body-mind you see in front of you has the ability to make choices. Now obviously I don't have unlimited options for my choices. I can't decide for something that I'm not even aware of. But nevertheless, within the limited scope of the choices that are available to me, I can choose more or less freely. When I'm done filming this video, for example, it is completely up to me if I want to drink coffee or tea. I obviously have both the physical and cognitive abilities to go upstairs and prepare a coffee or a tea for me. In that sense, I am not restricted. I can consider the benefits that each drink has for me. What taste I prefer, what will give me more energy, what I already drank early in the day. I can consider all these aspects and then make a choice. So in that sense, I am free to do whatever I want. The relative perspective, which I described just now, is of course useful. In this relative sort of way, distinguishing between someone who was forced to do something or someone who did something out of their own volition matters, of course. There's a gigantic difference to us if somebody drives their car and out of their own free will decides to run somebody over, or a person who is being held hostage and being forced to do the same thing. And I don't want to question that this distinction makes sense. It does. We need it. Our society, the judgments we make, the laws we have, they all depend on this sort of distinction. Now, while this relative way of speaking about free will absolutely makes sense, there's also a deeper way of looking at it, which clearly shows us that free will does not exist. Let me explain to you why that is the case. For most people, when they say that we have free will, what they mean is that there is a separate entity within the body-mind that has the ability to make different choices and perform different actions depending on their own preferences. But if we look at this assumption closely, we see that it's actually not true at all. You see, answering the question of whether free will really exists, not just as a concept, but actually as something real, is not quite as difficult as you might think it is. The issue with this question and why it causes so much confusion to people is that they have a wrong starting assumption. They first believe that they are a limited entity existing in a body-mind and then ask whether this entity has free will. So let's take a step back from that assumption. Let us first investigate whether this limited entity in the body-mind actually exists. And if we see that in fact it does not exist, obviously the question of asking whether a thing that does not exist have free will doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So ask yourself, this chooser, this decider, this being that has free will, where is it? Explore your own experience. Explore your own awareness right now. Now you believe that there is someone or something making choices. Where is this someone? Intuitively, you might say, well, it's in my head. It's me, behind my eyes, making choices, deciding whether I want to continue listening or do something else. Well, okay then, let's find this being. You say it's inside your head, but what do you know of having a head? Really look at it closely. You may close your eyes now for a bit and notice what your experience of your head is. You can feel your head, of course. You can even touch it and you notice sensations arise. Within these sensations, is there a being which chooses, which decides? Really ask yourself this question. Take your time to really look at it. Does that question even make sense? All you know of having a head right now is the feeling of it, the sensations you have. And within these sensations, can you at all find something, a separate entity that exists apart from the sensation? Now you may open your eyes again. You could even look in a mirror right now and you would see a reflection of your head. This reflection would appear in your visual field. But within this reflection, is there the decider? Obviously not. It's a ridiculous question. You can continue this same investigation throughout your whole body. Wherever you explore, wherever you look, you will not find a separate being that decides or makes choices. If the separate being does not exist, does it even make sense to ask the question of whether this being has free will? Of course it doesn't. Something that is non-existent can obviously not have free will. So you see that in a more relative sense, free will as a concept is obviously useful. It structures our life individually and as a society. But if we look deeply at what we actually are, we see that there isn't anything that can have free will, and therefore free will ultimately doesn't exist. So what are the implications of this? Don't make the mistake of saying that because there actually is no separate chooser, there is no separate decider, nothing matters anymore. You can do whatever you want. People who say that there is no difference between good choices and bad choices make the mistake of confusing the relative and ultimate level of looking at things. Yes, ultimately, there is no separate decider, there is no separate chooser, but ultimately, there isn't even anything we can distinguish in consciousness. There is just awareness itself. So if we talk about separate beings and choices, good and bad, consequences, if we talk about the relative level of existence, then obviously the outcomes, the choices that we make, they matter. Now you might also ask yourself why it even matters, this question of free will. Why should you even investigate it? I would say there's good reason to do so. I want to talk about the topic of guilt in another video more extensively. But for now, let me just say that a lot of unnecessary suffering is caused by the assumption that we are in fact a separate, limited entity which chooses and decides, and therefore has to carry the burden of guilt. To some extent that might be useful, but a lot of times what happens is that we restrict ourselves, we force ourselves into a cage of guilt which doesn't help anybody. When you see that the separate decider ultimately doesn't exist, what happens is that learning can take place. Your actions and the outcomes of your actions can now appear clearly in your mind. This allows you to make better choices in the future without punishing yourself over past mistakes that you can't change now. It allows the body-mind to learn and evolve. I hope you found this exploration of free will useful. A lot of times this topic can be challenging to people and hard to sort of wrap their minds around. Don't worry if that's the case for you. Maybe just watch this video again and take your time to consider what I'm saying. Of course, you can also write a question in the comments and maybe I can help you out on some finer points. Thank you for watching, and if you want to stay up to date on my latest video, also consider subscribing. I will see you here next time.